In this episode of Call of Duty Stories, we will be going over, in no particular order, the top 10 horror movies to inspire the initial concept, story, and timeline of Call of Duty Nazi Zombies. The reason we'll be going over the initial timeline of Nazi Zombies is because in the last half dozen games or so, the timeline has changed or gone through many renditions that the bulk of the fanbase does not seem to enjoy or jive with very much, and the core love tends to always resonate back to the initial story. So let's get into it. As many of you know, every zombies television show or movie has a different depiction of what we call a zombie. Whether it comes down to how fast they move, the sound they make, or whether the infection is a virus, a fungus, radiation, demon possession, or simply a spell that makes you undead and brings you back to living once the spell is broken. And before you call anything within Call of Duty Zombies plagiarism, keep in mind a lot of the initial timeline was essentially written online by the fans. The first two Nazi zombie maps, Verrückt and Nach der Untoten, had very little, if any, story at all. In the first map, we only got a basic premise of soldiers in abandoned buildings that were being surrounded by the undead. Survive as long as you can. There was no more rhyme or reason to anything else given to the mystery box or how zombies came to be or buying guns off the wall for that matter. And in the second map, you get a little bit of story, but nothing reaches far outside the walls of the asylum. The lore didn't really expand or take off until the third map, Shinonuma, which not only had Easter eggs and writings pertaining to the lore hidden throughout the map, but also had a radioactive meteorite of element 115 right outside the edge of the map itself, giving our first hint into what created these undead, which brings us to our very first movie at number 10, Night of the Living Dead. Night of the Living Dead was George Romero's first of many masterpieces that introduced us to the modern zombie. That is to say, in the way that we tend to think of zombies today. Not simply a product of a voodoo spell, but of some type of illness or contagion that directly affects human beings afflicted by the infected, and then causes them to feast on other human beings. The horrific black and white depiction of the cannibalistic undead also inspired the black and white aesthetic to the opening of Ascension. Out of all the different ways zombie movies portray the illness's origin, Night of the Living Dead is the only major zombie story where the infection originates from radioactive material from outer space, specifically Venus.
Question centers on the recent Explorer satellite shot to Venus. That satellite, you'll recall, started back to Earth, but never got here. That's the space vehicle which orbited Venus and then was purposely destroyed by NASA when scientists discovered it was carrying a mysterious high-level radiation with it. Could that radiation be somehow responsible for the wholesale murders we're now suffering?
Venus, which, surprise, surprise, is where Call of Duty Zombies Revelations Cypher number 4 claims the source of 115 is located. By the way, honorable mention of space radiation zombies, Night of the Comet. Though the zombies aren't really undead per se and the comet just passes the Earth by, nothing actually lands, it's still a very honorable mention. Next up, a huge part of what makes Call of Duty Nazi Zombies isn't just premise, but sound design. Zombies have specific moans, groans, hisses, and of course click-clacking. But scariest of all is the demonic sound of zombies in Call of Duty. Let's take a listen.
Yeah! Sam!
That's because zombies in Call of Duty scream and growl in a voice harmony of G major, which they got from The Evil Dead. This movie is one of the most brutal zombie flicks of all time. All the gore and horror you could ask for and then some. Now, these zombies are essentially possessions by evil spirits brought about by playing the recording of an archaeologist reading a deadite resurrection spell from the Necronomicon.
Recitation of these passages that the demons are given license to possess the living.
No big deal.
Tatra amistrobin hazarta. Tatir mano mansizon hazan sobar.
And if you think the recording sounds familiar, that's because it inspired the recordings of Brock and Gary in the Easter eggs of Shangri-La.
I've been trapped in the temple structure for days. Gary is dead, and I don't see a way out of here.
It's now a
October 1st, 4:33 p.m. Henrietta is dead. God help me, I buried her in the earthen floor of the fruit cellar.
It's also the first notable zombie movie to manipulate the undead voices in such an unsettling way.
Sleep awakened us from our ancient slumber. You will die! Like the others before.
Just like what we hear in Call of Duty Zombies. By the way, subjecting anybody's voice to G major conversion will sound scary. Just for proof, here's SpongeBob. This next flick was the inspiration for the aesthetic of one map, and one map only, Call of the Dead. This map had it all. George Romero, Danny Trejo, Robert Englund, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Michael Rooker, all playing themselves and made canon in the original Zombies timeline. They even interact with the original crew of Dempsey, Richtoff, and Nikolai and Takio through the map's Easter egg. But most importantly, this map was overtly Grindhouse. Now, because of George Romero's involvement in the map, in the title including phrases like "of the dead" and claiming the map is from Romero in some way, it's easy to assume this gym was mainly inspired by him or his films, which was my original assumption. But in reality, his presence was simply to pay homage to the genre altogether. This map in all reality would not exist the way it does without the zombie Grindhouse masterpiece that came out 4 years earlier, Planet Terror. This is probably my favorite on the list. It's way over the top and super fun. Blood, guts, boils, carnage, an array of wacky characters and cinematic tomfoolery that you just have to watch. The movie even opens with a spoof trailer of a fake movie called Machete, starring Danny Trejo, which at the time was not a real film that existed, but the fake trailer was such a hit that in late 2010, Machete got his own honest-to-God film, which was still in some theaters when Black Ops 1 released. And Call of the Dead pays homage to the flick in the trailer of Call of the Dead, letting Danny Trejo chop up zombies with a couple of machetes. 2011 was a magical time to be a Zombies fan. Next up, every true Zombies fan has played the legendary map Der Riese. It's what first introduced us to the Pack-a-Punch as well as the Telepath. And any true horror movie fan should instantly recognize this blatantly familiar set piece from number 7 on our list, a film known as The Fly. The Fly is a remake of a classic horror flick and a classic in its own right. It's a film where a scientist played by Jeffrey Goldblum is trying to perfect the technology of teleportation, at one point taking the risk of teleporting himself in a telepod. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to him, a fly got inside the machine and joins him on his journey, and they unknowingly meld into one being, which over time results in a horrific transformation. He gains a lot of strength, but he also begins to change mentally, as well as eventually having to vomit up acid to digest his food, much like a fly, until he eventually turns into, well, a giant insect. In the original storyline for Nazi Zombies, not only do the telepaths look extremely similar, if not the same, but they too are the catalyst for the horrors that inevitably unfold in the Nazi Zombies timeline, with Samantha accidentally being teleported, leading her to stumble into the pyramid device and getting trapped into the ether, which leads us to movie number 6, Poltergeist. In this horror masterpiece, directed by Steven Spielberg, a family purchases a home in a neighborhood that was built on top of an old cemetery, which acts as a portal between this world and the next. The daughter of the family, at one point, gets pulled into that dimension, leaving the family to deal with the helpless horror of hearing their daughter's scared and disembodied voice throughout the home, contemplating no foreseeable way to rescue her, which, to be honest, was itself inspired by an episode of The Twilight Zone where a little girl, whom, rather than being a victim of a poltergeist, simply stumbles upon an interdimensional slip in her bedroom in a freak cosmic mishap. Of course, in Zombies, the little girl tends to be a lot less innocent in the other dimension, essentially pitching a fit, while her consciousness is projected through the ether to control the undead, infected with 115 to enact revenge against Group 935 and Richtofen, who betrayed her father Maxis. Which brings us to movie number 5, Men Behind the Sun. This horror movie is both exploitation and based on historical events. It follows the horrific human experiments conducted by the Japanese in World War II. These absolutely mind-boggling, gut-churning experiments were carried out by a secret group known as Unit 731, which was the partial inspiration for Group 935. Probably one of the hardest films to watch on the list, especially considering there was no special effects industry in China at the time, so in place of special effects and props, in certain scenes, They just used animals' entrails and or real human cadavers. You've been warned. Next up, at number 4, Inglorious Bastards. Though not a horror movie per se, could definitely fall in the horror movie-dominated genre of exploitation film. And the film also stars horror writer-director Eli Roth. Its major plot point revolves around its ending, which is an assassination plot targeting Adolf Hitler while he is visiting a high-class Nazi theater to watch and enjoy a Nazi propaganda feature presentation. And Bastards was an absolute hit in 2009, undoubtedly with many of the team members over at Treyarch Studios, which brings no surprise when in 2010, one of the first zombie maps to release with Black Ops 1 is Kino der Toten. Now, there are some dead giveaways that this map was not a part of the original lineup, therefore a bit rushed and last minute, but it succeeded as an epic map nonetheless. Luckily, only a few portions of the map were designed with any major Inglorious Bastard resemblance in mind, with the rest of the map being designed purely for the sake of gameplay and function, of which we are incredibly grateful, considering Kino der Toten became a very beloved map among the Nazi zombie community. But this map brings us to our next cinematic piece of inspiration, sitting at number 3, Return of the Living Dead. This horror/comedy is so well done and has such a fun plot, not to mention it also stars James Karen, the guy who built the neighborhood on top of the cemetery in Poltergeist. It easily makes any zombies-related top 10 list. In Return of the Living Dead, the boss, played by James Karen, shows the main character Freddy a barrel with a decayed human body inside, which was the result of US military chemical experiments gone awry. The boss bangs the can and the barrel springs a leak, which releases the greenish-yellowish gas known as trioxin 245, which ends up infecting the two main characters. And if you look close in the map Kino der Toten, you will see these familiar-looking containers with decaying corpses inside. This map was also our introduction to crawler zombies, which upon death release a sickening yellowish-green gas. But the gas's name, Nova 6, got its inspiration from another zombie movie, coming in at number 2, Night of the Zombies. In this 1981 classic, a CIA operative is paired with 3 other people, including a scientist, his niece, and a police officer with a thick Russian accent, in search of a long-lost batch of barrels filled with hazardous chemicals abandoned in Germany during World War II. The CIA operative Nick is more interested in finding American World War II soldiers who went missing in the same era. The chemical is known as Gamma 693, or Gamma 6 for short. Later in the film, it turns out the scientist character within their group was actually the mad scientist who created Gamma 6 in the first place, and ends up turning on the rest of the characters, which sounds a little familiar. Though in this film, it turns out the scientist is being kept young by a combination of an old dose of Gamma 6 and by secretly eating human flesh. The betrayal towards the end of the film manifests when the scientist can't find barrels of Gamma 6 in time, and he begins to decay, leading him to confess his subplot to the film and try to kill the other main characters. This is definitely one of those films where more money and time was spent on the script, the traveling, and the poster than was actually spent on paying the actors and getting quality film equipment. But it's still definitely worth a watch. Coming in at number 1. Many of you were probably waiting on this one. I'm talking, of course, about Outpost from March 2008. 8 months before the release of World at War, probably the most influential movie credited with the fresh inspiration for the game mode's basic concepts altogether. Parts of this film also bear the inspiration for the experimental footage discovery within Kino der Toten, and the electrical traps and the Wunderwaffe and their aesthetic. The plot revolves around a few mercenaries who make their way to an abandoned Nazi bunker. These mercs include DC, Pryor, Jordan, Cotter, Votek, McKay, and Tack. While searching inside, they find a pile of corpses, and among the corpses they find a survivor who is a mute man named Gotts, who is catatonic, they believe because of trauma. But of course, their main focus is to find and turn on the power. They end up getting startled by a radio playing random music. Then it gets revealed the reason they've been brought here was for a mysterious piece of technology only their guide knows anything about. They then stumble across a projector with old footage of the Nazi experiments that took place at the bunker. The undead begin to periodically appear and cause problems, in the middle of which they find out Gotts was the head Nazi officer leading the experiments. An all-out battle eventually entails between the soldiers and the Nazi zombies, which at one point leads down to the bunker, where the guide activates the giant machine, causing a daisy chain of blue electricity to travel through the zombies and kill them. That's not the end of the movie, of course, but that is the end of all the things in the film that inspired aspects of Nazi zombies. The last honorable mention for this video is not a movie, but a 2007 video game called Last Stand. It was a 2D side-scrolling flash game originally posted on Newgrounds for those who remember. And I played this game tons as a teen back in the day, and it was reported by the devs as an initial spark for inspiration for an endless survival game. And it also was the partial inspiration for adding dogs later on. But obviously, the game and its concepts quickly grew and blew way past that depicted in Last Stand. But still, a vital, beautiful, and nostalgic part of this story, so I had to give it an honorable mention. That's the end of our list. Let me know down in the comments if you liked it. If you feel that I missed any films, or you want me to talk about more films that inspired zombies or Call of Duty in general, let me know down in the comments. And if you like this video, go check out our other Call of Duty story vids. Be sure to smash that like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys next time.